Yeah. Go ahead.
Alrighty.
I'll follow your lead.
Okay. Hello, you guys. Welcome to season 2, episode, I think 4 or 5. I don't know. But season 2 is all about expanding your lens, learning about different things, changing your perspective, or just listening to a new perspective. And today I have Elias, and we're going to be talking about psychedelic healing. And that's a topic that I feel it's so important nowadays, especially because mental health is such an important, it's health, you know? I feel like sometimes we separate it, but yes. Welcome.
Thank you.
Hi.
Thank you so much. So like I was telling you, I'm really curious about why you're curious about psychedelics. Because in my experience, there's a lot of people who have never even heard about psychedelics as a healing tool. And so, I'm just always curious about how people came to know about them. I know that you're doing this podcast, so probably you have a lot of contact with people who, maybe are in the community, or like you're learning a lot from different people. And I know that you do yoga, so I know those circles as well. Kind of, there's an overlap.
Yes.
So I don't know if you want to maybe start with kind of a little bit of what is it that you want to know, and then we can go into questions. And
For sure. So I have always known psychedelics, especially because I come from a very Latin background, as it's a drug.
Right.
It's bad for you. If you do it, you're gonna become crazy.
Yeah.
So during the years, it was a big transition coming from drugs are bad, like any types of drugs are bad, and staying away from it, to slowly realizing that it's a medicine. You know what I mean? And the first, I guess, is weed considered a psychedelic?
Some people consider it a psychedelic, but I guess pharmacologically it's not quite the same because it doesn't act on the same way. But for some people, definitely, especially when you eat it, it has slightly more psychedelic effects, and depending on the dose as well. Dose is always a very important component of those.
Which I have a question to ask you about those later on. But I guess like the first introduction to psychedelics that people have, I guess, is with weed,
The
and
gateway
then
drug. Yeah.
that gateway drug. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, is a medicine just like other psychedelics. And como que a ton of questions are going up in my mind.
Yeah.
But to como que resumirte, my interest came from, I started watching Hamilton, ¿cómo se llama?
Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia.
Sí, I
Yes.
love it. And so I was like, okay, this is so cool, like learning the chemistry behind psychedelics, learning the actual healing process, that there's ceremonies. And then, yes. Yeah.
I think Hamilton is one of the best TV shows out there, and I recommend it to anybody who I think might have an interest, even if they're not specifically interested in psychedelics. I think the way that he addresses drug education, it's so amazing, because I come from the same background, right? And in my family, drugs were a complete you banned basically, and there was no gray zone. It's like if you do drugs, like you're out. Yeah,
it's such a taboo that.
It's just a no. And when something is so black and white, it doesn't allow you to ask questions, then it actually makes you a little bit more curious. And then when you start, that was at least my experience, when you start knowing it a little bit, when you start getting familiar with it, and you realize that, well, there's much more than just don't do it because it's bad. Just you try weed for the first time, and it's like, okay, well, I didn't die, I didn't become like an addict, I didn't do this and that, but everything that they told me that was going to happen. So you're like, okay, I want to go deeper into this, and I guess that's why that's part of what opened those experiences for me, for sure. It was just this curiosity from, wow, there's definitely something more than what I've always been told through my whole life.
And I think that's the case with everything, right? When you become a little bit more conscious, I think especially when you start this conscious journey, or this like spiritual journey, you become more open-minded, and you start asking questions and also experiencing that, because why wouldn't you try something just because people say like, no, don't do it, unless it's like something really bad. I mean, this gonna get
There's
murdered.
some
Like,
kind
you're
of-
not gonna try murder. Like, let me
Yeah.
see.
Try everything once.
Exactly.
It's like, no, I guess there's a level. And even when you're talking about drugs, you do have to understand this is one of the dangers, I think, of telling people drugs are bad. Because just like I learned that, okay, weed is not that terrible, so I'm going to try something else. You still do have to do your research because there are some drugs that are much more dangerous than others,
Sure.
right? And so if you feel that you've been lied to regarding weed, now you want to try cocaine and maybe heroin, well, that might really take you to a completely different place than if you want to try mushrooms and LSD, right? And this is because there is nuance, there are subtleties, there are things that are very different between those classes of drugs. So I think drug education is, incredibly important. And that's, I'm a little bit of a geek, so I love, I love learning about that stuff, reading about that stuff. And Hamilton is
A great resource.
yeah, it is definitely. So Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia, I think he's on Vice or HBO. So for anybody who wants to look him up, it's great content.
On
Yeah.
Hulu, I think he's also, and he
Hulu,
actually
yeah.
is going to stop the series.
Is it?
Yes, he was on Joe Rogan and he was talking about how it was just too much money, too much production, too much. And Joe was telling him how important he was to this world, not only to the like the entertainment world, but also to the drug world. And when I say drug, I don't mean like. And that's also another thing. Like whenever you say drug, it immediately gives people like drugs.
Yeah.
Like no, like a negative connotation.
Yeah.
But there is a difference between drugs and medicine. And if you think about it, what you consume, like actual Advil and Vicodin and all of those are actual drugs that do make you addicted. But Joe was saying how important it is for a society, especially a society that has so many resources, to have a person like Hamilton to educate them on the chemical side of drugs, the experience in drugs, like just the whole general learning.
Yeah, absolutely. And the cultural side that he goes so deep into, it's
True.
Yeah, it's an amazing resource. I know, if you cannot find his show, I know that he does interviews with Joe Rogan, he does interviews with Tim Ferriss, like his content is out there.
YouTube.
Yeah, even if he stops, he's done so many episodes that are so high quality that I think, he's got a legacy in this world like forever.
Sure.
Yeah.
For sure. So let's talk about, give us a little bit of your background, and I am super curious on how you got to like this psychedelic world, not only like immersing yourself for I don't want to say for fun, but as a hobby, but doing it more as a profession.
Yeah, so actually my background has nothing to do with any of this at all. And I never tried a psychedelic drug until I was 30 years old. So
How old
that
are
was
you now?
I'm 32.
32.
So it was about 2 years ago. So it's fairly recent still. But it was so powerful as an experience, and I kind of understood through reading and connecting with people that this was such a game changer, that we're just starting to see kind of a little bit of a movement below the ocean, but there's going to be a massive wave. Like I can guarantee that, for mental health and for a lot of other things. And so that's why I'm here now. But to go back a little bit on my background, I was born.
Okay. I was born at 1:45.
I think what's interesting to know is, I come from Venezuela. And back in Venezuela, like you mentioned, I didn't really touch drugs because that Latin culture, at least in my house, it was definitely taboo. Although I did kind of start experimenting with weed at some point after I graduated high school, and that kind of opened up my horizons a little bit, but I never really experimented more with any other drugs. I think that there was always a really, really intense interest for psychedelics because the consciousness side of it, like I knew that they were called mind expanding drugs, and this kind of levels of consciousness that they would help you explore.
And where did you learn that from?
So I did have friends that kind of dabbled
Okay.
into that, and I have heard their comments, and I've always, again, like been, very, I read all kinds of stuff, and I expose myself to a lot of things. And so I knew about the role that psychedelics had played in music, for example. I knew about hippie culture in the 70s and the revolution. So all of those things were kind of in my periphery. They were somewhere there in my brain. But I think part of the taboo and part of lack of opportunities for me to, you're not going to find LSD like at the grocery store, right? You gotta make some contacts, and I guess I wasn't really going with people who would push it my way. I'm sure that if I would have tried, I would have found it because it is out there, but it was never really an active interest. But I was curious. I went to school. I did business, so again, nothing to do with anything on this world. And for the last 10 years, I've just been working on tech. So right now I'm an IT consultant, and again, nothing to do with this world, nothing to do with psychology or healing or anything like that. But 2 years ago, I think the first thing that kind of turned me on to this again and really sparked an active interest was a Joe Rogan interview with somebody called Paul Stamets. You know who he is?
No.
No, so it's a guy who always wears this little mushroom hat. It's like a hat actually made of mushrooms,
I
right?
think I've seen it.
Yeah.
Yes, like a legit mushroom, and he
Like
picks
proper.
mushrooms.
Yeah, he's a mushroom guy basically. Like he knows so much. And mushrooms, of course, well, for psychedelics we're going to be talking about psilocybin mushrooms, which are the magic mushrooms. But mushrooms are, I mean, a world on their own. There's so much, not just for the psychedelic mushrooms, but everything else. We're talking about edible mushrooms and medicinal mushrooms and all these kinds of things. So he started talking about that, and it was fascinating. And then towards the end of the interview, he started talking about his own experience with psychedelic mushrooms and how they have helped him with, a few things from his stutter to actually, just basically changing his life in all these kinds of ways. And he talked about some visions, and at that time I'm like, wow, that's crazy. It's like, what he's talking about. But the more I heard what he had to say, the more I kind of got curious. And from there, when I started doing the research, I realized that there was this whole wave, like I mentioned, that it was kind of still underground. It was very subtle. But 2 years ago, it was already developed enough that I kind of picked up on that current. And I read a book that is called How to Change Your Mind.
I have it.
You have it?
Yes.
Yeah, so that's an amazing book. Have you read it?
I have only like the como la mitad, but yes.
Yeah, so Michael Pollan, his contribution to psychedelics was that he was not a drug user before. He was drug naive, basically. He until he wrote this book, I think he was 60-something or 70s when he wrote this book. He had never really tried any psychedelic drugs or anything like that. But he somehow caught wind of all of this research that was happening in the universities in the United States and some universities abroad, where they were using psychedelics to treat depression and PTSD. And he was so interested that he just basically put himself through, not the trials, because he didn't do research trials, but through the psychedelic experiences that he could find on the underground market, let's say, because there's a lot of underground therapists. Yeah. And then he wrote this book,
which were legal before. Like during the 70s, the studies were illegal, done by universities, but then...
Yeah, absolutely. So we can talk a little bit about that, because the history of it is really fascinating. But what he did was he brought this whole subject to the mainstream, because he had already some very, very popular books. He's a very well-known author, and he has some reputation that is completely different from maybe the drug users that were already writing about that. And so his thing just kind of made it explode. So by the time that I picked up on it, it was already known that this was going to be a game changer, really, for mental health. Yeah, it is. And so so I could kind of go on and on, but maybe if you have some questions and you want to at some point
of course,
reel me in, feel free, because there's so much about the history of Michael Pollan, the books.
I guess one of the questions that someone asked was when I talked about like actual drugs, pills, like chemically produced and natural pills, and actual medicine, which a medicine can be a psychedelic medicine could be, I don't want to say marijuana, but let's say marijuana for the purposes of what you explained. Psilocybin?
Yeah, psilocybin.
Which is mushrooms. Ayahuasca, peyote. Those are like the natural psychedelics, which are very healing. And I want you to explain why and the process of how that comes to be. But and I think last year or maybe this year, no, it was last year, a bunch of states have made all of these medicines, psychedelic medicines, legal.
Yeah.
How do you think Big Pharma is reacting to a natural, almost like free or inexpensive kind of medicine?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So a lot of places in the United States have actually decriminalized the mushrooms for sure, and some other natural medicines. I think there are some movements that are called decriminalized nature that have been definitely in Canada and in the U.S. kind of making the rounds. I know that Oregon, I think Washington D.C., quite a few states have taken that step. The difference between decriminalization and legalization is decriminalization, you can actually you won't go to jail if you possess it, but it's not legal in the sense that there's no legal framework for you to acquire it. You still have to buy it on the underground market. Like cannabis right now, it's legal in Canada, which means that you can go into a store and buy cannabis. While mushrooms have been decriminalized, meaning you cannot find them on the market, you have to go underground, but nobody's going to take you to jail for having those mushrooms.
Got it.
So that's kind of the difference. So that's where we're at. I just mentioned it because we still kind of have a little bit of a
But that's a
some
first
steps.
step. That's
Absolutely,
like
yeah.
a huge step.
And that's the same kind of route that you saw marijuana go as they were legalizing it as well. First decriminalization, and still at the federal level, I don't think we have you don't have decriminalization here necessarily or legalization. I'm not sure what the status of cannabis is here, but in Canada, definitely saw it go first decriminalization and then legalization.
Right.
And so that means that somebody is actually starting to notice that there is a use for this. An impact. One of the interesting things about these medicines is specifically when you're talking for things like depression, is that it's not like an antidepressant that we give you, you go home and you take it for the rest of your life, or unless you really take steps to wean off of it. Right? An antidepressant is not really a medicine, like you were saying, the difference. It is to treat your symptoms of depression.
Exactly. Right? I look at it as a band-aid, but not a true fix to the problem, which to the source.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's what it is, and that's why they have to just keep taking it and they keep prescribing it. And it's an easy prescription, and it has all kinds of side effects. They can become very addictive. Some of them are very, very difficult to wean off of them. Like if you want to quit, you cannot just do it from one day to the other. Like your body really starts needing these substances.
The antidepressants.
Yeah, the antidepressants, absolutely. So it's never recommended, like if you're taking, certain types of antidepressants like SSRIs, depending on your dose, if you try to quit right away, you're going to have terrible withdrawal symptoms. Some people talk about it like brain zaps. It's a very difficult thing. And that's not even talking about the side effects that you have when everything is supposed to be working right without you even trying to quit. So that's the medical approach. That's a pharmaceutical approach to depression right now and to a lot of other ailments. And what is revolutionary from these substances is that, according to the studies that are going on, when you give mushrooms to a patient that has depression, we'll talk about PTSD as well a little bit, you can basically change their measures of depression significantly in one session. So,
and how do you measure depression?
Yeah, so that's, I don't know exactly the details, so it would be a little bit complicated to go into them right now, but those are medical studies that are happening in the universities. And so they have, when you do some kind of scientific study, you need to have a way to measure the depression or the PTSD
maybe
of the person.
The amount of dopamine coming into your brain.
I think it's mostly like questionnaires based on your life, how you're living your life, what are the kind of symptoms that you're living with. For PTSD is something very similar. So they have to figure out where you are kind of in a scale in order to treat you and then measure the comparative results.
Okay.
But basically in one session, what they call one dosing session, which means one time where you eat the mushrooms.
Can I ask you something about it before you continue?
Yeah, go ahead.
When you do those sessions, do you do it microdosing or do you do like a one big
a macrodose
amount?
Yeah, so that's what they would call it, a macrodose, to compare it to the microdose. Those are macrodoses. So those are the equivalent, and I keep saying when they eat the mushrooms, they don't really eat the mushrooms because they use synthetic psilocybin for these studies. But basically, it's the same molecule. But they give it the equivalent of 4 to 5 grams of dried mushrooms, which is a big dose. Yeah, that's what it's called in psychedelic circles. It's called the heroic dose.
Wow, and that's a microdosing.
That's a macro
Oh,
dose.
macro. I was
Yeah.
gonna say, oh my gosh.
Yeah. No, that's a dose that will, it will kind of propel you to, you're gonna face something. You're gonna have a psychedelic experience. And so these studies are usually done in a way in which you have one or two, maybe even three sessions with somebody to prepare you before.
Okay.
And then you have the dosing session, which is the day in which you're actually consuming the substance. And then you have a few integration sessions, which is integration basically is how do I take all of this material that came out of it and integrate it into my life. And I, make a practice out of remembering, living it, and, just sitting with it, all of that. So that's actually one of the most important parts.
Yes, I was gonna say that. I feel like that's one of the most essential part of the whole experience, because like it's a lot of information that comes your way, a lot of healing, a lot of things that just appear, and it's like, okay, how do I handle this? And without proper especially when dealing with hard topics like depression or PTSD, you really need a guide. So can you walk me through how the session is before you take it?
Yeah, absolutely. But before that, I'll just, because you asked me a question about the big pharma and what I was trying to get to, and I know I kind of took a big detour.
And you're doing a full circle.
Yeah, exactly.
Full
Let's bring it back to that big pharma piece, because it's so interesting, is that one session of psilocybin mushrooms can bring your depression down significant levels where you basically don't meet the criteria for depression anymore based on the definition of depression on the medical books, right? And so
Wow.
of course they are not quite sure what to make of it, because, well, here you have this thing which in one session, which first of all grows on the ground, literally. You can grow it on your closet. There's guides online. If you do enough research, you're going to have mushrooms growing. So you don't even have to pay for that. You have to find somebody who hopefully will walk you through that experience. If you want to have a guide, but you could also potentially do it alone if you've researched enough and you're the kind of person who can guide themselves through that experience. Right. Which I'm, by the way, not necessarily recommending, because it does take a lot and it can be, very, very trying. So it's always better to have somebody who knows what they're doing and to kind of guide you through that work.
What
yeah, they call them a trip sitter.
Trip sitter.
Yeah, a trip sitter is kind of on the lower rankings of somebody who can sit with you, which means they're not really gonna even interact with you or guide you through anything. They're just gonna be there to
make sure you're
veil
safe
for your your physical body. And then you have guides, and then you might have therapists, which mostly are on the ground right now. But anyway, so all of that just makes it into this kind of, it sounds very miraculous, but it's also not a great way to make a profit. If I want to sell you this as a package, as a pharmaceutical industry trying to sell you this for your depression, how do we make money of it? You're not coming back all the time, because this one session or maybe a couple sessions a year are going to take care of your issue. So they're definitely being faced with that question right now. Some pharmaceutical industries are starting to go into the route of trying to even patent some what's the word? I forget what the word is in English. Basically, you have a molecule and you can make kind of a clone almost of that molecule with a slight change.
Like a copy-paste version, but more chemically.
Exactly. And so they're trying to patent it so that they can then produce their own psilocybin to sell. Some of them are actually trying to patent the process of the psilocybin therapy, the whole psychedelic therapy process. They're trying all of their kind of sneaky tricks.
I don't like that.
It's very scary, actually. It's really scary. Because that's not the way that it's supposed to be.
Exactly, and I feel like that takes away the whole purpose and the whole intention of it is medicine. And I know that, like, talking about it in a therapy way, it's one thing, but when you do it as a ceremony or as a ritual, which that's how they were used in the first place thousands of years ago, they would actually do like a ceremony, and they would think it and they would speak to it like ayahuasca. And so I feel like by them doing that, it takes away the whole magic, which is obviously what they want. So
Yeah, there are some scary times for sure. There's a couple of companies specifically that I have in mind that it's okay. I kind of keep an eye on them because, yeah, because they're trying really hard and they initially got a lot of information. They got really close to the scientists who were working on this and kind of brought them in and they're like, yeah, they really honeypot them a little bit into trusting them. And then once that they had this download of information, they shut them down and they turn around and, lawyers and whatnot and trying to figure out a way to keep these processes for themselves. So, the pharmaceutical industries are going to continue to get into that world. But what's interesting about this is that the models that are coming out of this are so different from the pharmaceutical model. It's not just about the pill or the substance. That's
Exactly.
really what's interesting. It's about the experience.
The setting,
Yeah.
the intention. And it is crazy.
Yeah, it's really, really interesting.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, I feel like, and that's what happened with weed, I feel like they realized how you're in a different state of mind, but in the best way possible, right? Like you're more aware, you're more sensitive, you're more connected with yourself, you're more creative, you're just more. And I feel like they've always wanted to control us, and by taking away something that's natural, something that's actually good for you, that's not addicting to you, it's taking away the whole power. And now that I mentioned addicting, so which psychedelic drugs are chemically addicting when you take them, or how much of it do you have to take in order for you to become addicting? Like nicotine, like alcohol, like all of there.
Yeah, so that's really good question. I think it's a complex question, and it's a question that I can't answer fully because I have limited experience with all psychedelics. So I mostly have worked with psilocybin, LSD, and MDMA, which is ecstasy. And ecstasy is not a classic psychedelic, but it's still kind of being considered in this whole therapeutic method. Actually, MDMA is the most powerful one for PTSD. And so that's one of the ones that's actually probably has the potential to become legal sooner.
So how would you, because I don't know much about ecstasy or MDMA, how would you dose that? How does the whole dosing work in the process?
So that's something that the researchers are currently still kind of, not, I wouldn't say struggling with, but experimenting with for sure. And so are you talking about the actual dose, like how much should the person receive? So normally there's this organization that's called MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and they are the biggest researcher right now basically around psychedelics, if I want to say the biggest, if not one of the biggest. And they are the ones, their story is amazing, but that's like half an hour just talking about that.
Another episode.
Yeah, so definitely look into Rick Dublin if you're interested in that. Any interview with him is amazing.
It's really amazing how with one session, one intentional therapy, and I don't want to call it natural because then we go back to the whole, like mushroom is natural, marijuana is natural, but then LSD and then MDMA, those are chemicals. But just a session and with a psychedelic drug, how big of an impact that has in your life. And I cannot imagine the relief, the healing process that it must be for somebody who lives with that every single day, has after they experience this therapy.
It's life-changing.
It really is.
It is life-changing. It's the difference between being scared of going out because you never know when you might be triggered, and just being able to go back to just your regular life. Mostly, not everybody gets cured in that way, but a lot of people bring down their symptoms to levels where they don't qualify. Again, just like we're talking about, how do you measure depression? Same way, you measure PTSD based on certain criteria, and you measure the level of PTSD. And I think there's a checklist of, I'm not sure how many, but something like 15 or 20 different things that would categorize you as somebody with this type of PTSD. And yeah, people after these experiences don't check enough boxes in order to be really classified. It doesn't mean that they've been cured of their PTSD completely necessarily. But yeah, this is why it's so interesting. But politically, you would expect that progressives and the left would be the ones who would be pushing for these kinds of things, right? Conservatives maybe not so much. But because it can be such a help for veterans, then there is actually bipartisan support for these kinds of changes. So it's really cool. It's like one of those few things where people are coming together, and it's like, yeah, we need that for people.
That's so amazing. And I feel like that's going to heal. I truly believe that when a person heals, they're able to heal other people as well. So psychedelics are just beautiful, and I feel like it's so important to have conversations like this where we destigmatize.
Yeah.
Destigmatize. Eso, destigmatize. Me faltó ahí la G. Topics like this, which are so important, and that maybe people didn't know that it was an option. Because at some point when you're living with so much pain or so much pain, I guess, because every disease brings pain, they maybe surrender to that life. And there is options out there, whether that's whether you're looking at a spiritual way or at a mental way. Or am I making sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Because usually it's the medical route that we go, right? When we're talking about being depressed, the first thing that people do is they go to the doctor, psychiatrist, they get diagnosed, they get given pills. That's maybe not everybody, but that's a very common route. And to know that there are other options out there, and yeah, it doesn't have to be psychedelics. Psychedelics, I think, are just one that we're kind of starting to play around with it. But the spiritual route it's an amazing thing, and it's something that psychedelics have a lot to do with. It always comes to mind this thing that, because you just mentioned, when people are hurt and they heal, they can help heal other people. I got this little quote that I always remember, which is hurt people. Right? Yes. I love that, and I think it's so true. And once you're able to go through that process yourself, absolutely, like the doors that open for you are incredible. So this is why for me, this is really life-changing, and it has the potential to change the world. I really think so. That's why I'm so passionate about it.
It really does, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like something as harsh as PTSD or as depression. It can be anxiety, or it can be like looking at it in more spiritual perspective, I guess. It really does help you see things in a different way, because when you see things in a different way, you're able to understand and ask questions about it. And going back to the whole what I said about the band-aid, that drugs are band-aids, that's what they are. And I feel like with the psychedelics, it's not only it heals you like the surface, but it takes you to the core. It takes you to the actual roots of the problem, over the trauma. And trauma doesn't necessarily have to be, I was at the war and PTSD or something very horrible.
Oh, no.
It can be something as simple as, when I was little, my parents used to scream at me, and that really like traumatized me. And therefore I'm a very like una persona muy callada, and very, that's trauma. Like trauma comes in different ways, in different forms, colors, shapes. So I feel like psychedelics, como decimos nosotros, matan 50 pájaros en un tiro.
Right.
Because it plays the spiritual part of it. It plays the healing part of it. It plays the opening your mind to new perspectives, new ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll talk a little bit more about that piece, I think. I'm just going to come back really quickly to the addiction part, because I realize when I speak I have this tendency to go in other routes. But so basically MDMA is one of the most addictive of the psychedelics. MDMA has the potential for addiction, and also is kind of neurotoxic. So again, it's not part of the classic psychedelics. It's not something that you can do very often. recommended not to do it more than, maybe the kind of rule of thumb is once every 3 months, although MAPS for those research studies, they kind of push the bar a little bit, but they're taking care of the patient at the same time. So that's one of the most addictive ones, and I would say definitely even from personal experience that you kind of feel it as you're coming down off that high of MDMA, that there is not necessarily a need, but there is a want, there is a psychological craving for that kind of happiness again, because MDMA is basically happiness in a pill, right? It just explodes your brain with serotonin, and so you're feeling, like you've never felt before. And so definitely it is a feeling that you want to catch again. And it's also usually a very happy high, as in not only is it happiness that's being pumped into your brain, you can still have bad experiences with it, but generally you're processing, if you do it recreationally at least, you're going to have a good time, and so less of a problem. Psilocybin, LSD, they're much more tricky, definitely. As a user experience, it's not as simple as MDMA. So the first two things to know about psilocybin and LSD is that they're not really addictive, they're not physically addictive, and actually it's very, very hard to get addicted to them. Physically, first of all, you build a tolerance right away. And so if you eat 1 gram of mushrooms today, tomorrow to get the same effects, you're maybe going to need about 2 grams. And then the day after, you're going to need about 3 to 4 grams.
Wow.
So by the end of the week, you're going to be eating a handful of mushrooms, and you're not going to like that experience.
And what if you did like a couple of grams months ago? Is your resistance still the same?
Yeah, it takes about 2 weeks. That's kind of the general.
Okay.
But if you're doing a drug every 2 weeks, maybe you're becoming a little bit dependent, but it's not something that you can do on the daily, and it's not something that you can overdo that much. The other thing is that they're not toxic, so there's not really an amount that you can consume for it to kill you because of the psilocybin inside of it, or because of the active ingredient, right? It's not that's going to be harmful. But what it is when I said that they're a little bit trickier, is that these are drugs that are going to make you confront a lot of things that you have inside. They're not necessarily fun drugs. They can be fun drugs. They're definitely being used in recreational settings as well as therapeutic settings. But at least in my experience, you can have really challenging moments. And this is what people call bad trips. In the literature now, in research, they're not called bad trips, they're called challenging, because there's always something good that you can get out of it.
There is no, of course in the moment it is bad and you don't want to be living through it, but it's necessary for it to come out. Yeah,
even if you're feeling terribly during the experience, with the right help and support and context and setting,
yes, that is so important.
You can distill a lot of good from it. So not a big worry, at least with those two and the classic psychedelics, to develop an addiction, although they can obviously be, if you're in a really bad place and these things make you feel good for a little bit, that's what addiction is, right? If you think that you're using them as an escape, then you're gonna, or if you are using them as an escape and you think it's a good escape, you're gonna come back to them as you would with anything else, but there's not physical dependence. And at some point, they're going to kind of kick your butt, and they're going to be like, no, you're not going to use us for escaping.
Yes,
you're going to realize.
That's the thing. They're so smart, and they, at the end of the day, they are a living thing. Just like, plants are a living thing. Yeah. But I guess once you take them out of the ground, they're dead. But they know and they teach you so much. It's interesting that you mentioned the whole the bad trip and that it makes you look inside.
Yeah.
But like I was telling you, in my experience, I was extremely okay. I was and hence, I did it in a perfect setting. I did a little ritual. I try to have, here's the thing, and this is how I feel about it. Any type of drug, especially when it comes to a medicine and a psychedelic, is you have to have respect for it. Or else, it's like you said, it's going to kick your butt and it's going to be listen.
Oh, yeah.
No who says than me. And so when you have like the best intention and it's a good place, like there's a difference between doing it in a garden in your backyard than doing it at a party or doing it at a rave or doing it, you know what I mean?
All right.
So when I did it, it was in the most peaceful place, and I was perfectly having a conversation with everybody. Like it was like I was like a little high, but also I was able to interact with others. But I did realize that when I took the time to like be with myself, a few things came up. But you know what's even more interesting? I have had more of a experience doing yoga like on Tuesday.
Right. Yeah, that's so interesting to me because I've never, outside of this conversation that we're having, outside of the psychedelics, I haven't really had similar experiences with anything else. Meditation, yoga. I'm pretty new to yoga, but I've tried to get into meditation a few times, and it's very, very hard for me. So it blows my mind that you can actually go to yoga and kind of have an experience like you had. But it's all in the same, it's different ways to kind of arrive at the same place.
Exactly. It's like different methods. You can arrive at it during meditation or while exercising or while reading or while taking psychedelics or while just being.
Yeah.
But it's just different vehicles.
Yeah. Have you heard about the runner's high? People who run, I can't understand that. I just can't. Like I run a little bit, and it's this meditative state, right? For those who don't know, it's this meditative state that you achieve at some point you're running, where you're just kind of so focused on what you're doing that you're out of your mind, basically. And I just can't.
Really, I
understand
thought it was
getting
the
into that.
I mean, I thought I would call that flow state.
Right.
And I thought that a runner's high was like a legit dopamine release, that you feel so good and you're like, oh, I feel so good after I work. Like you have a runner's high after yoga.
Right. Yeah. Well, the way that I had heard about the runner's high, my understanding was this place where you're still running, like if you're doing a marathon or something like this, but you're feeling like at some point you stop being tired, you stop feeling your physical pain, and you're just in this meditative state where you're just like one step, two step, one step, two step. And for some people who kind of achieve that, that's kind of what makes running the most amazing thing. And to me, it sounds similar to like experiences that you might have on yoga or meditation. So you had something on Tuesday.
I did. It was so powerful. It was very powerful. And like I've always said, I have little epiphanies in yoga. And also because I allow myself to, like, I welcome that. But it was so revealing to me. And it was interesting because I didn't go with that intention. I was like, let me just take the class. And Sean is usually like very fast paced.
Yeah.
But this time he was tired, and so we were doing a lot of poses, like easy poses on the floor, whereas normally we're up and we're moving. And during certain poses, but especially now that I think about it, during the fetal position, like whether we're like this or on the floor. And I remember like there is a position that you're just like this, and you put your like third eye between your knees. I just started crying, like so much information download started happening, so much little traumas, little understanding, so much healing went through that when I lifted up my head, my whole knee was like black from mascara. I was like, okay, let me just keep crying.
Right.
But it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful because you're able to release all of that unwanted emotion, and not only unwanted, but es como una reserva, ¿me entiendes? Como una reserva de emociones y de cosas que has sentido que no lo has podido soltar, y en ese momento se presentó la oportunidad de soltarse, and I did. Whereas in my experience, when I took psilocybin, I didn't have any revelation. And you want to know, like, one of the revelations that I had? The main one was the fact to like the timing was always perfect. But all of my revelations, I already knew them.
Yeah.
And I already lived that way. So it wasn't new to me. It was just like an extra reminder. So, but my cousin, which we did it together, he gave himself the opportunity to like be with himself and go deep, which I know if I gave myself that opportunity, it would have been much different. But it's very interesting to me because I did take like a pretty, I don't want to say high dose, but like 4 grams, 3 grams.
That's a significant dose
And
for
I was
sure.
like completely, I was super happy, but it wasn't like I had imagined. But it was perfect. It was perfect, and the beautiful thing about it, and I can't believe I'm like sharing this, but the beautiful thing about it was that the mushrooms taught me, and they were the golden teachers, so just the name.
Yeah.
They taught me a lot of things, not only that day, but a day before, during, and the days after. So it was like a whole week of information, of download, of teachings. And so that's why I tell you, like, they know, because it was still in my system and now like activated.
Yeah.
And depending on the setting, it would como que me enseñaban lo que tenía que aprender en ese momento, en ese estado, en ese environment. So it's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the things that I would have never imagined myself saying before, but they say that they will give you not the trip that you want, but the trip that you need every time. Yeah. And so when you talk about it not being exactly what you imagined, I think that's kind of how they work.
Exactly. And that was completely. And before, you know how I'm telling you that they were teaching me before I took them? The night before, I was like, obviously a little bit nervous, and I was like wondering.
Yeah.
And once again, like, it's like little messages that I got from them. I know I sound like a crazy person.
You're talking, I understand, I perfectly understand what you mean, yeah.
Pero they were basically saying, like, go with the flow. Everything is perfect. Like, everything is going to be perfect. And if I tell you the whole experience of how I even got them,
Right.
they literally were handed it to me. O sea, me llegaron. And so it's just, it was perfect, because I know that if I would have had a different or a more deep or like a bad trip or gone too inside, I would have had a different perspective. But yeah, it was perfect. But I do feel like I am ready to, whenever they come, because they come to you, to really go deeper and like really go deeper.
Yeah. That's the recreational experiences are, and I would call that a recreational experience, not because you didn't do some kind of work and not just because it was taken to be fun. Like, I usually kind of just separate them into recreational and therapeutic. And therapeutic is really following this method that I'll talk to you a little bit about, which is a very specific way of doing them. That if you think that what you were saying sounds crazy, when people hear about what this thing is, it's like, right, no, that's not, no. And so in my own recreational experiences, I've definitely had something, similar things happen to me, where it's like just downloads of information. It's just insight. It's just like this little thing, this little thought just floated to the top. This little, piece of, hey, have you ever looked at this thing this way? And it just kind of.
It's interesting that you say like if it floated to the top.
That's what it feels
for me,
like for me.
It's from under, from above.
Really?
So it's like.
All right. You know what psychedelic means?
Psycho, so from like the brain, like the psychic.
Yeah.
Delic. No.
It means mind manifesting. So, and there's two ways in which that has been interpreted, and some people interpret it as it's your mind kind of manifesting things. You're kind of seeing the true contents of your mind. but for some other people, it's the mind manifesting into you, like something beyond your mind, this universal consciousness.
Yes.
You're opening the doors for that.
Yes.
So that sounds more like your experience was, I'm opening the door for this.
Which I completely identify with that second part, because even with weed.
Right? Yeah, a lot of people do that.
Bro, that's why I was even like at some point, I don't want to use the word scared, but I was like very careful in where I did it and how I did it and the people that I was with when experiencing the psychedelic states, because if with other that's like much softer than those, the amount of information download that I get whenever I do them, it's a lot. It's a lot. But at the end of the day, it's information that you need at that moment, and that it's necessary for you to heal eventually, because everyone needs healing. Like every single person needs healing. Qué interesante. Qué loco, qué loco.
So when we're talking about those experiences, so you were talking about going deeper, I can almost compare it to like, so when you do a recreational experience, you're kind of just walking around, you see something, oh, this is really interesting, this is really beautiful, you focus on that for a little bit, then you move around, you talk to somebody, you listen to some music, right? You're in a space where it's full of distractions and everything looks so interesting that you can go inside for a little bit and you can listen to yourself, but then you go outside, right, outwards, and start interacting with the world. And I would compare that to maybe just kind of getting in your car and starting to drive, and it's like, okay, I gotta go to Orlando, and it's like, oh well, this looks kind of nice, and then you start taking detours, right? And it's not necessarily bad, right? It's a long way, and maybe you'll never make it to Orlando, and you ended up just having a really nice day and just kind of drove around, and you're like, well, it's time to go home. When you do it in the therapeutic way, the logistics
it's like
of
express
it,
lane.
it's kind of like an express lane. It's like, we're gonna take you, like, you're gonna focus and you're gonna go all the way. And so the therapeutic method is actually, so a psychedelic experience, depending on which one you're doing, can last between 6 to 12 hours. Mushrooms kind of being between 4 and 6, 7. LSD being up to 12 hours. And the peak is usually about 2 hours, I think, on mushrooms, and about 4 hours on LSD.
Wow, I didn't know LSD was 12 hours.
Yeah, it's very long.
And with LSD, do you see, because I know and it also depends, like you were saying back at the beginning, mushrooms they have like thousands of, I guess, strains. Would you call them strains?
Yeah, strains, yeah.
And depending on the strain, it's like sativa and all of that. Which, interesting enough, I don't know where I heard it or read it. I think it was in the Open Your Mind book, that he was saying that the whole sativa or the whole indica strain, that's basically something that us humans invented, because there's really no way to see the difference.
Right.
Maybe someone just smoked and be like, oh, I feel relaxed. Oh, me siento activo.
Right.
But going back to the whole like mushroom strain, depending on a mushroom, it gives you, it's harsher, I guess. And that's why they say that Golden Teachers is the best like introduction to them.
Right. Yeah.
Which ones do you guys...
There's a lot of debate on that. Well, first of all, most of the psychedelic mushrooms are from this species that's called cubensis, Psilocybe cubensis. And yeah, I'm going a little bit into the geeky part of it, but a lot of people say a cube, they call them cube for short, the cubensis. A cube is a cube is a cube. So no matter how many strains there are, they're all kind of similar. And then there are some people who will be like, there's two schools of thought, right? Where like, not at all. If you take, there's one that's called penis envy, and that's supposed to be about 2 times more powerful than the Golden Teachers. And there are some that are Mexicana something, they're very popular, like little tiny mushrooms that are supposed to be super strong as well. But it's hard to say, it really is hard to say. And that's why in the studies, in research studies in universities, they usually use the synthetic psilocybin.
I was going to ask you that. Why
Yeah.
synthetic and not? Is it because it works faster, or?
I don't think it works faster. I think it's cleaner. I think it's definitely more pharmaceutical grade. It's definitely much easier to measure. So when you have one mushroom and you say this is 1 gram, it's not 1 gram of psilocybin. It's 1 gram of your dried mushroom. The percentage of psilocybin inside of that mushroom, really hard to say.
Yeah.
So it's like if you're drinking a beer, but you don't know if it's 5% alcohol or if it's 20% alcohol. So that's kind of what psilocybin is. So in order to do science, you absolutely need some specific measures.
That makes complete sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's what they use, the synthetic. But I think it's also, just a little bit more, when I say cleaner, I just mean in terms of...
I get what you're saying. Like doing the guidelines, it's much easier to control that subject.
Yeah, absolutely.
In a way.
Absolutely.
So with mushrooms, they say that you have, at least I had very few visuals. Mm-hmm. But how is it with acid and how is it with MDMA?
Right. MDMA, basically no visuals. I think it's very rare to have visuals. MDMA is not like the other psychedelics. You're mostly sober in a way. Still definitely don't drive a car or anything like that, but it's a much more sober high, if I can say that strangely. You're very active. That's why it's a party drug and a rave drug. You want to dance, you want to interact with people. Not the same thing for LSD and mushrooms. And LSD and mushrooms, they're very similar in the kind of visuals that you will get. Some people give them kind of personalities and even say, well, the mushrooms have a very playful spirit. The LSD has a very techie kind of feeling. It's associated with,
that's so cool.
Yeah, just like ayahuasca is supposed to be a very motherly kind of feeling, right? She's the Mother Earth. And so each psychedelic, a lot of people really give them these personalities, and this is what you feel while you're in the mushrooms or in ayahuasca or in something else. With DMT, people talk about entities kind of being there, and it really feels like out of space, like you've crossed another dimension. So
with
each
MDMA?
DMT.
Oh, DMT, called, yeah.
And so it depends, I have never particularly, maybe I'm not quite attuned to those kinds of feelings, but I've never particularly felt that mushrooms were this thing versus MDMA. I never felt that presence as if there was a personality. I definitely see different visuals, but not a presence, not a personality, I would say.
And with LSD, I think based on what I've seen and what I've heard, they say that with acid it's more visual, and it's more like geometric figures.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I saw with acid for the first time I took it, I looked at my hand, and like a microchip, like it's got all this little routes, and that's kind of what it looked like.
I always see them as steps. Like first, I'm gonna do weed, and then I'm gonna do mushrooms, and then acid, and then this, and then this. It's like little levels. Mm-hmm. Do you think there's such a thing as levels? Like you should do this first, or each one is different, and you should do them without order?
Good question. I definitely saw it as steps for myself, and I still kind of do a little bit. I started with weed, and then I did mushrooms before I did LSD. I actually did MDMA before I did mushrooms, and
wow.
But that was because MDMA it's I guess more associated with the kind of outings that I was doing at the time. So I went to a music festival, and that was just a fully recreational experience. Yeah. So I guess if you want to think about it in terms of steps, it might help just because of the intensity of some of these experiences.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And going back to what I said, I'm like, if with one there is so much information download, I literally cannot imagine a new one that's harder than that. Yeah, absolutely. So I hear that DMT is something that will kind of blow your brains out. It's very intense. And it doesn't last that long.
No, that's it. But it only lasts about 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. If you do ayahuasca is actually the same molecule as DMT, except that they add something from another plant, which is an inhibitor to an enzyme that you have inside of you, so you process it much slower, and so it extends the whole trip. But I think in terms of intensity, it's pretty intense as well. Then there are other things that are just kind of really out of this world, like don't compare 5-MeO-DMT, which Hamilton did a show about. It's the one that they scrape off of the toads.
Yeah.
I was gonna say toads and frogs at the same time it came out. So,
A mí siempre me pasa, siempre usan las palabras y los dos.
So that's super intense, and some of those, my understanding, and I haven't tried all of these things, is that some of them are so intense that really the download that you can get, like the translation that you have to do in order to be able to apply whatever you lived to your life.
I like
it's
that
like
word,
whoa.
translation.
Yeah, because you're going into this other dimension, and all these things are happening, and then you come back to Earth, and you're like, well, I didn't see like my trauma or my parents doing something or my childhood. I just saw like a different entity, a purple woman that talked to me about how whatever, and it's like something so out of this world that the integration part of it is very, very difficult. But people still do it, and there seem to be some benefits, but they're less clear. Those are less well researched, for sure. So the mushroom experience is really, well, the therapeutic experience with it, because they do it with LSD as well. When they used to be legal, LSD was really, if I'm not mistaken, LSD was one of the first therapeutic psychedelics that was being used. Mushrooms started being used after. Anyway, I don't want to go too much into the timeline because I'm not an expert in that part. But they were very popular at some point with therapists, and it was legal. Then it became illegal for not only that, but definitely the revolution of the hippies was a big influence in that, and the government didn't like that all these people were kind of changing consciousness, and awakening, and they didn't want to go to war and kill Vietnamese, and it's like, okay, you guys, this is all illegal.
Chemicals, medicine.
And so with LSD and with mushrooms, where you're going to do a therapeutic session, you take the medicine after having some sessions where you've discussed trauma and the things that you want. You set an intention and you're followed, and then for about 6 to 8 hours you're sitting on a couch or lying down on a couch with un tapaojos, with like a blindfold, and with headphones. And you stay there. So when you're talking about somebody guiding your journey, they're just there to help you if at some point you need to come out of that space and basically guide you back into those headphones and that, so that you can refocus on your work. The guiding part happens before and after, really, on that preparation session, on that integration session. But in the day of the journey, that's just you, because you're the only one who can heal yourself.
So I have a question about that. So, because the way that it's pictured, it's very like express lane. And maybe that for some people it might be like too fast. And for that being too fast, they may be like be scared, and it has probably like the opposite effect. Y de pronto como que se rayan, or they have a bad trip because of that intensity. So what would you say to those people that would be like, why would I put myself in a position of doing it so harshly, instead of like just being in a room, me and you, and like me experience it, instead of like being completely you know what I'm saying? Yeah,
absolutely. And maybe I'll change the word of like the fast lane, because it's not necessarily, when we're talking about the healing that happens, I guess it's fast. What I was trying to get to with the analogy is that it's focused. It's like you're on the highway, and there's not that many exits, and you just
it's not like the healing is immediate, fast lane.
But I mean, it's definitely, it's not for everybody, and there are certain risks, but a lot of the psychedelic drugs work much faster to take somebody out of a deep depression. When we're talking about the studies that they've been made, it's not only depression, it's treatment-resistant depression, meaning that you've tried everything else that's out there in the market, and you've done your therapies, and you've taken antidepressants, and none of that has worked. And going through this experience then brings you to a level where you're not having suicidal ideations anymore in a matter of 2 days, rather than a couple of weeks, like normal antidepressants would be. And I don't want to introduce many others too, because there's a lot, and then it might get confusing. But ketamine is another kind of half psychedelic kind of, and there's ketamine clinics now that are legal for depression as well. And it's if you're at a point where you really need this help, they can be a great tool for that.
So let's say I suffer from depression, but I am not at that point where I have tried everything else and this is like my last resource. Can I still do it? Or do I need certain qualifications?
You can absolutely do it. I mean, it depends on how and where and with whom, right? Those researchers are looking for very specific things. And when I talk researchers, I haven't explained it, but there's basically Johns Hopkins University, Harvard is looking for, they've created a center for, like, some of these universities are not only just doing studies, they're creating centers for psychedelic, like, therapy studies. Like, it's that important. They're putting their money where the science and the benefits are. NYU as well. So in order to make it into one of those studies, you have to fit very specific criteria. But if you're just a person that is struggling with something and wants to try it out, there is a vast network of underground therapists that can offer these kinds of things. And there's always a possibility of doing it by yourself. But again, I wouldn't recommend doing it uninformed, because you have to have respect. It's like going into, you wouldn't go into the ocean if you don't know how to swim. So it's like, at least inform yourself, try to do as much research as you can, do a little bit of work. I definitely recommend for anybody who's going to go into something like this to, go to therapy first, like have actual talk therapy. Therapy. And maybe some other modalities like breath work or something like that kind of can familiarize you with having material come out that you have to deal with. Because that's what's going to happen. That's all that's going to happen, is you're going to have a lot of material to deal with. But I mean, it's a scary thing for sure.
But we're all scared of what we don't understand and what we don't know. But at the end of the day, it's all good. I don't think we ever told them what you do.
No, it's true. I think you asked me and I went in one of those real big tangents. So I can explain. So I'm studying right now to become a psychedelic preparation and integration coach. And so I want to be clear about the coaching part, because it's not the same thing as a therapist. Like, I'm not being trained to do therapy, and I'm not even being trained to give these people the medicine. Right? What I can do is prepare them for when they're going to go to see somebody who will administer the medicine.
You're the first step guy.
Exactly. I'm the kind of first step, and then the container for whatever comes out, I can help them integrate. The difference between a therapist and a coach, and again, this is just putting it out there because it is pretty important to understand, is that a therapist might diagnose you. They might think about how to help you in a very medical kind of mindset. As a coach, you don't do that. As a coach, all I can offer is kind of be another human, who can be there with you, who can provide a container for things to come out, to be your guide, guidance in the way of, if you tell me that you're feeling depressed, for example, a therapist might tell you, okay, if you're feeling depressed, I can kind of see that you're depressed. This is what you should do.
Let's formulate something to help you.
As a coach, I can say, okay, you're telling me that I'm depressed. I cannot really say that because I don't have that training. But tell me, how is that showing up for you during your days? And how is that preventing you from being the person that you want to be and from achieving your happiness? And so then if you tell me, well, I have a terrible relation with my mom and I don't, I can't wake up early because, whatever I do, then I can help you formulate those strategies in order to cope with the things that are blocking you from arriving at where you want to arrive. But I'm never going to be able to treat you as, let's treat your depression, let's diagnose you, you're not my patient. I'm just kind of providing a container for you
You're
to...
like the holding hand in
Yeah.
the first and third step.
Yeah, absolutely.
it.
And so that's what I'm doing. And
That's so cool.
it's really, I'm so happy. I can't wait to kind of ditch my IT, because no matter what it is that I'm doing right now, it doesn't even compare to what's going to be happening in the future.
It's
Yeah,
going to be a
I'm very
huge,
excited.
like you said at the beginning, this is a huge wave that's happening. And thank God people are realizing there's conversations like this, people are being open and educating yourself about it. So I thank you for coming on here, explaining what you do, explaining and taking away estamos poniendo nuestro granito de arena to stigmatize, ¿cómo se llama? ¿Cómo se dice?
You asked me and I'm like,
My gosh.
destigmatize?
Destigmatize?
Right? Take away the stigma, yeah.
Yes, and take away the taboo that psychedelics are, and show their true, like, intention, their true healing process, healing, what they are.
Their purpose, maybe, right?
Purpose,
Why they're here.
purpose.
They're here and they've been here, and we've just kind of have them hidden in a little box for the last 40, 50 years, and
We're
that
back.
box is starting to open up. Yeah, it's great.
That's so exciting. Alrighty. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for the
thank you.
invitation.
Of course, anytime. Thank you, guys. All of this, obviously, we are not a professional, so take this with a grain of salt. If you are going to do it recreationally, setting is so important. Set is basically your environment where you are, and setting. Oh no,
Yes.
al revés. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Set is like the intention that you're putting for that trip, and setting is your environment. So be smart about it. Do it with people that have the best intentions for you, and yeah. Thank you, guys. I hope you guys learned something new. I hope this expanded your lens a little bit, and I will see you in the next episode. Ciao.